Greetings, everyone. Welcome to Be Green with Amy. I'm Amy. After adopting a whole food plant-based lifestyle, my hubby Rick and I lost over 130 pounds. Now I coach others on their plant-based journey. Just Task Voice. Let's welcome our guest.
Confused about whether fruit is safe or if diabetes can actually be reversed? Today, we'll dive deep into the power of plant-based nutrition. Please click like to help Be Green with Amy. Welcome, world-renowned registered dietitian, Brenda Davis.
Greenings, Green Warrior, and welcome back, Brenda.
Oh, thank you so much, Amy. I'm just delighted to be here, and thank you to all your listeners as well for being with us today.
Well, last time I talked to you earlier, and last time you joined us with Dr. Resma Shah because you had just released a book and you discussed raising healthy children on a whole food plant-based diet. And that topic was just so helpful to so many people who have families, and it's still relevant, and the book is still fantastic. But today we are excited to have you here to dive into another essential topic, which is diabetes and what we need to know to support better health outcomes. And I'm just so glad that you came back to do this, because I consider you the queen of that and so much more plant-based.
Well, thank you so much. And it is definitely a topic that I'm very passionate about, and I've done clinical research on and written several or co-authored several peer-reviewed publications on, and written actually 3 books on the topic as well. So definitely something that holds a lot of interest. And many of my family members on my father's side had type 2 diabetes, and many of my cousins now do as well.
Yeah, I have it on my maternal side. So my maternal grandmother and my mom both had it. And I felt like it was coming on for me too. This is before I became plant-based, that I felt in between meals I'd be shaky, and my head I'd get headaches, and I would be very irritable, and I just thought that was normal. And then after adopting this lifestyle, I found that if I needed to, I could go maybe 6 hours between meals and not really even think about it. And maybe sometimes if I got hungry and then I was distracted with something I was doing, it was an uneventful thing. So it's just so nice to know that there are ways to manage this and avoid it, which is what I did, because by the time my mother was my age, and my grandmother, they both had it by the time they were my age. So I'm glad to change that family tree.
It's like a form of freedom when you don't have to deal with all of those things. I think Henry Frederick Emile once said, in health there is freedom. Health is the first of all liberties. And I think he was so right. And so many people don't get that until after they've been diagnosed with a chronic disease and are really struggling. It's kind of like you get hit over the head with a disease and you start to get how valuable health really is.
Yes, it is. And I was wondering, with the Green Warriors that are tuning in, I want to ask them, have you or someone you know tried managing diabetes through diet? So that's my question to the Green Warriors that are watching, and maybe you can type in the chat if you know anybody that has diabetes, and I'd like to hear about that. And of course, share this with them if you do know somebody, because I'm sure that this will all be very, very helpful. So I think what we're going to do is start off with our game of true or false.
Sounds good to me.
It's time for True or False on Be Green with Amy Live. Answer true or false to Amy's questions in the comments below, and Amy will ask our guest for the expert answer.
Okay, Green Warrior, get ready. True or false? Type 2 diabetes is an irreversible disease. Type in your guess for that answer. And Brenda, tell us about that.
Well, the answer is false, but I understand people that would write true, because this was the thinking for many decades. Patients were told that diabetes was a progressive, irreversible disease. And I even remember a client once who worked with an endocrinologist that told him that he was suffering from a progressive, irreversible disease and he'd be dead within a couple of years. He was on about 40 units of insulin a day and 17 pills. And he had had type 2 diabetes for over 20 years. His kidneys were failing. He had severe coronary heart disease, peripheral neuropathy, hypertension, cataracts, chronic gout. It was the works. And after less than 1 year on a whole food plant-based diet, he was off all of his insulin and pills. And he completely reversed every single one of these so-called progressive irreversible diseases. And when he asked his endocrinologist why he hadn't told him that this was possible, the endocrinologist replied, I didn't tell you this was possible because I didn't know it was possible. He said, if I hadn't seen it with my own two eyes, I wouldn't have believed it. But we do know now, and in fact, it is well accepted by even the most conservative mainstream diabetes organizations that you can drive diabetes into remission. And they tend to call it remission rather than reversal, simply because it's a disease that will come back very rapidly if you don't continue on your lifestyle path. So people can go into remission, but of course the disease can reappear if they slip. And in fact, I can remember the first time that there was a consensus statement on diabetes remission was 2009. So we've known it for quite a long time. But then in 2021, the American Diabetes Association, the Endocrine Society, the European Association for the Study of Diabetes, Diabetes UK, they all join forces to provide sort of for once and for all a definitive definition of type 2 diabetes remission. And it's actually defined as having an A1C less than 6.5%, measured at least 3 months after the cessation or after you stop taking glucose lowering medications. And so this is not only well accepted, it's pretty universally accepted today.
Yeah, I love how those sources have gotten on board, because
Yes.
so often you'll go onto their websites and they'll have recipes for crazy things and advice that isn't going along with what you're talking about today, and to actually see these mainstream sources agree that that would be something that we could do to put in remission is. It really is so helpful to know that we can show that to people in case they're worried about it, because I have clients that say, I'm not sure if I should do this, and at least I can point them to these websites and say, look, they're even saying that it's.
As a matter of fact, Amy, I just want to add that today we are now more and more hearing that the goal for treatment of type 2 diabetes is remission. We never used to hear that being said by mainstream practitioners.
What they would say, we want to manage it. So now we actually have that goal.
Yeah. The new goal is remission, because it's achievable in many individuals, not in all individuals. If the pancreas has been adequately damaged, there may not be a chance of sort of recovering beta cell function. And so these individuals will never go into remission, but they can dramatically improve their glycemic responses. They can improve their risk of comorbidities and complications of diabetes. So these are very worthwhile goals as well, of course.
Yeah, when I put that question out to our Green Warriors, if they knew anybody that had type 2 diabetes, Mona said, I know people, but unfortunately they worry about carbs. And that brings us to another true or false that we have. So, Green Warrior, true or false, low carbohydrate is best for people with type 2 diabetes. So type in your guess, and Brenda, if you want to give us the answer for that.
Yeah, I believe it's false. There are many diabetic experts who would disagree with me, but there is really no question that low carbohydrate diets are associated with some benefits. They stabilize blood glucose, they reduce the need for insulin and hypoglycemic agents, they decrease triglycerides. However, there is also evidence that they do not reverse insulin resistance. And so if you give a load of carbohydrates to someone who's been eating a low carbohydrate diet, they are very resistant to, they have such high insulin resistance that they don't respond well to the load of carbohydrates. And in fact, these types of diets may even make insulin resistance worse. So in other words, what I'm saying is that they may not succeed in driving diabetes truly into remission. And the other thing that I think is vital in this discourse is to think about, there are many diets that can produce weight loss and help with stabilizing blood glucose if they're low enough in calories. But to me, what makes a diet sort of the best choice for people with diabetes is that it also lowers the risk of mortality and other chronic diseases, and it reduces risk of the complications of diabetes. And there's no diet that succeeds in doing that better than a whole food plant-based diet. And so I think when you think about low carb diets, they tend to be high meat diets. So they're high in saturated fat, they're low in fiber, they're low in antioxidants, they're low in phytochemicals and many other protective components. And so we're not wanting to reduce protective components. We want to reduce our risk of the biggest killers of people with diabetes, like heart disease. And so these aren't things we want to feature in our diet. We want to minimize them in our diets.
Right. Yeah, it seems like one of the reasons why they have short-term success is because with these low-carb diets, they're eliminating processed foods.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Many of them do. Not all of them do. Some of them include plenty of processed meat, but like ham and bacon and so forth. But generally, because they're not using a lot of carbohydrates, that means they're eliminating refined carbohydrates, which can be problematic, of course.
Mm-hmm. Yes. And there's so much confusion, and maybe we'll get back to the carbohydrates too, because I just wish there was another word to differentiate what the refined carbohydrates are versus the carbohydrates that we enjoy every day. And I wish that there's just a simpler terminology to explain it. And often with my clients, I tell them, you're on a slow carb diet.
That's great. That's great.
Yeah. And for those of you that are watching, what I'm saying is that these carbs that we're eating as plant-based eaters, they travel slowly through our bloodstream versus things like cakes and cookies that go very quickly through our bloodstream because they don't have fiber with them. So that's why I try to say a slow carb. So the slow carbs are okay, but don't eat the fast carbs. And maybe we can make a movement about that, Brenda.
That's a great thought. That's so good, Amy. Great idea.
Okay, let's do our next question, Green Warrior. And this is an important one to talk about. True or false? Fruit is a healthy food for people with type 2 diabetes. What do you think, Green Warriors? Type in your guess. Brenda, tell us about this.
Oh, it's absolutely true. And because fruit is loaded with fiber, antioxidants, phytochemicals, prebiotics, and the intake of fruit is actually associated with a reduced risk of type 2 diabetes. So people who are regular fruit consumers also tend to have less morbidity and mortality. They have less heart disease. So, but that having been said, not all fruit is created equal. So generally, focusing on higher fiber, lower GI fruit can be beneficial for blood glucose control. But any whole fruit is fair game as far as I'm concerned. When you're choosing bananas, you might want to choose less ripe than more ripe. And so what fruits are kind of problematic? Well, certainly fruit juice. So when you squeeze fruit and take out all the fiber, then it is much more rapidly absorbed into the bloodstream. Fruits that have added sugar. So a lot of canned fruits have sugars added. Some dried fruits have sugars added. And speaking of dried fruits, they are more concentrated. They have the water removed. So they're more concentrated in sugar, so they can cause blood sugar to go up a little more. That having been said, I think they are the absolute best choice to replace sugar in cookies and baked goods, because dried fruits are very concentrated sources of fiber and phytochemicals and antioxidants and good things. And so whereas sugar has one of the lowest nutrient density of all foods. And so replacing sugar with dried fruits is really quite a wonderful idea. And then the other thing I think is worth mentioning is that fruit eaten on its own by itself can increase blood sugar more than if you're eating it with something that slows its absorption, like a couple of walnuts in the shell, or a little bit of nut butter and a sprinkle of cinnamon, which tends to slow glycemic response. So those are things you can do. But generally, fruit is completely more than fair game. It's actually a really healthy addition to the diet.
Yeah, I remember that my mom had she would carry around candy bars in her purse.
Oh.
Because she had the type 2 diabetes, she would say, "I'm crashing." And I guess your insulin levels spike and go down and up and down. And
well, especially if you're on insulin or you're on medications that cause your blood sugar to go down. So, and unfortunately, you don't want to be correcting that blood sugar drop with food that makes your diabetes worse. You want to be correcting it with healthy choices. They need to be relatively rapidly absorbed into the bloodstream. Certainly, a fruit is a really good choice.
Yeah. Well, she wasn't on insulin yet, but she was getting there. But she definitely was on metformin and all kinds of medications. And
yeah,
so yeah, and I mean, I had kind of those symptoms, not as bad as she did, and it's not fun. It's not fun to feel that way. You feel like somebody, like that you were plugged in, and all of a sudden somebody pulled out the plug, and you're slowly fading away. And so I could understand why. I mean, she wouldn't leave the house without them, and it was just like her emergency kit that she would dive into. And and at that time, I mean, she's since passed, but at that time, I'm just starting to learn about the lifestyle, and there wasn't that much information out there back in 2012 as there is now. And so I didn't want to mislead her with the fruit, because there wasn't too much information to tell you whether or not it was okay. So I was telling her to carry around baked sweet potatoes in a Ziploc bag. And that whenever she felt a little weak or shaky, that she should just eat the sweet potato.
That's a wonderful suggestion. Something of value, something that provides nutrition.
Of course, it's not the same as having a candy bar, and it almost kind of gave her a little permission slip to have it. So I think
for sure.
That was the thing too. But yeah, so it's good to know about the fruit, because now, do different people react as far as their insulin response to different kinds of fruits? Is it like a blanket thing where everybody can have the same fruits, or is it
Yeah.
an individual?
And we're all individuals, and our response to not just fruits, but all sorts of foods varies considerably. And that's why it's so valuable to have your glucometer and to do testing after you eat certain things to see how your body responds, because it is not the same for every person. And sometimes it's really surprising what people will respond to. But I always find it interesting when you look at Cyrus and Robbie, mastering diabetes. I mean, they're eating massive amounts of fruit and having really excellent results. So it's generally, I think we can tolerate a fair bit of fruit in the diet.
Yeah. So you talked about the glucometer. So they have something called a continuous glucose
Yes,
monitor,
which
right?
is, yeah, awesome.
Yeah. So I think that would be a wonderful thing. I don't know if insurance pays for people who have type 2 diabetes to get that or not. I'm not sure. I guess it
I think
depends.
it might depend on your insurance, but I think a lot of people would be covered for that.
Yeah, because I think that would be so give you that immediate feedback every time that you eat. You could
Yes.
see what was
Uh,
happening.
Absolutely, and it'd be so fun to compare, eating an apple with having an apple and two walnuts, or an apple and a little bit of peanut butter and a sprinkle of cinnamon, and just to compare your responses with all sorts of different combinations of food.
Yeah, so when you're talking about the introduction of nuts and nut butter, so is the premise that the fat slows down the absorption?
Yes, and nuts and seeds and these higher fat plant foods, and even legumes. Nuts and seeds actually have the lowest glycemic impact of all plant foods by far. So they, because of the fat, tend to delay the absorption of carbohydrates from other foods. So they work really well for doing that. The thing that people have to be conscious of where nuts and seeds are concerned is they contain about 600 to 800 calories a cup. And when you're trying to lose weight to restore insulin sensitivity, you really need to be conscious about the amount you're eating, because it can be hard to lose weight when you're eating that number of calories. So rather than eating them by the bowl full, you're sprinkling a few on your salad, you're sprinkling a few on your cereal, you're having I like to encourage people, when they're eating nuts as part of a snack, to have the nut in the shell if possible, so that it takes you time and effort to get the nut out, and 1 or 2 walnuts will be sufficient with your piece of fruit, and so it helps you naturally to eat an appropriate amount.
Yeah, that sounds right. And then talk about the cinnamon, because that's an interesting.
Yeah, so there are several herbs that have been shown to provide benefits for people with diabetes. So cinnamon, ginger, fenugreek, especially, seem to slow the absorption of carbohydrates into the bloodstream, and so they're fairly effective. But there's a whole laundry list of herbs and spices that have shown to be beneficial for people with type 2 diabetes.
Yeah, and that would be, and they also add a lot of interesting flavors to the diet. So that's a
Exactly,
yeah,
exactly. So, and some of them, are beneficial because they reduce inflammation, because they reduce oxidative stress. And so there are a lot of, like turmeric, for example, and if you combine it with black pepper, it helps with the absorption and so on. So there are a number of herbs and spices that can be beneficial.
yeah. See, Green Warriors, we're learning a lot today, and these are really great tips. So I
Yeah,
hope.
and one of the things that I use is black cumin.
Mhm.
And so black cumin is something that Michael Greger has a couple of videos about, but you can buy it fairly cheaply. And then I just put it in a grinder, and
Yeah,
I just grind it on my salads and my main dishes. And so that's another one that can be really beneficial
yeah,
for
and
weight
it
loss.
is it is it's a powerful. I use it, and it's very powerful as far as the flavor goes. But you don't really need too much.
No, you don't. No, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah, just a little bit in there, and it'll be good to go. Yeah. Michael Greger, the nutritionfacts.org, there's a lot of great resources there and studies to learn. So he always comes up with the most interesting studies that they find out. And it's nice because these are things that in the beginning, of course, you're just going to start out with, just don't worry about all these little extra things. But then after you have adopted a lifestyle like this, then you can tweak it and improve it. And
Exactly.
make it even more effective. Okay, Green Warriors, what about this one? True or false? Animal protein is better than plant protein for people with type 2 diabetes because it is carbohydrate free. Okay, what do you think about that? And Brenda, let us know.
Well, it's definitely false in my view. And again, there's no question that animal protein causes minimal increase in blood glucose, while plant protein always contains carbohydrates unless it's isolated plant protein. And so it has a greater impact on blood sugar. But what a lot of people don't think about is that plant proteins have a lot higher concentration of protective components, just like what we talked about in fruits, the fiber and prebiotics and antioxidants and phytochemicals and all of these things. And they are very consistently associated with better health outcomes, lower risk of morbidity and mortality. They have more favorable impacts on body weight, blood pressure, lipids, markers of oxidative stress and inflammation, insulin resistance. And so that's why you're seeing so much emphasis. I mean, even in my national food guide, I'm a Canadian, there's a recommendation to choose plant-based protein sources most often. And so there's an emphasis on those for these very reasons. So it's and the research is also really, really clear on this. There have been so many studies that have compared outcomes with animal protein versus plant protein. And I'm just always so impressed with the results. So there was a study in 2022 of 143,000 people that showed animal protein increased type 2 diabetes risk by 31%, and that was comparing the highest versus lowest quintile of intake, and that means the 1/5 of the participants. And then plant protein actually reduced risk by 18% in the highest versus lowest quintile of intake. And they found substituting 5% of energy, and that would be like 100 calories in a 2,000 calorie diet, of animal protein with plant protein reduced diabetes risk by about 21%. And so, this is pretty powerful. There was also a meta-analysis of 28 studies that found risk of, and this is looking at meat intake, found that risk of type 2 diabetes increased by 31% for every 3.5 ounce serving of meat consumed, and by 46% for every 1 3/4 ounce of processed meat consumed. And we see the exact opposite with legume intake. There was a study, an Adventist Health study of almost 65,000 women, and they found legume intake was associated with 38% risk reduction in the highest versus lowest quintile of intake. And it was actually 47% for soybeans. So there's just no question that plant protein provides pretty significant advantages over animal protein.
Oh, wow. And I'm so glad that you can tell us about all these studies, because it's so important to know. Some people are a little bit apprehensive about changing their diet, especially since a lot of the physicians and don't necessarily are not necessarily up to date on this information. So this is something that they could see on the timestamp where you said that and play it back for their physician. So we have people watching on Instagram, and TTH004 asks, how many hours should you wait to check your blood sugar? I'm sure that's what it means, after eating.
Well, I would say 60 to 90 minutes is when you'll see the highest blood sugars postprandially or after a meal. So that's a pretty decent time. Somewhere an hour to an hour and a half is good.
Yeah. So do you recommend that people keep a journal? I mean, how would they manage this to know what different foods?
You know, a lot of like the glucose, continuous glucose monitoring, but even if you just have a glucometer, a lot of the glucometers have an automatic where they record everything and show you how you're doing. And so you definitely can use that. And I think that's just pretty standard for glucometers nowadays.
Okay, well, very good. Let me just see. I think we had some other questions pop up. Okay, so we have, I think we covered that part. All right, well, this is something that you're, that's another area of expertise for you. So John said, what's your take on whole grains and diabetes? Should we be cautious with them?
Well, you know, I actually love this question because whole grains are a big passion for me, so much so that I created a tool called the whole grain hierarchy, specifically to help people make better whole grain choices. But whole grains and starchy vegetables are concentrated sources of carbohydrates, and when you're super insulin resistant, you can have some challenges when you eat a lot of concentrated carbohydrates. So when we were doing the research in the Marshall Islands, at the beginning, we put out our bowls of brown rice and barley and, you know, the sweet potatoes and so forth, and let people have as much as they want. And we learned very quickly that that was not a good idea. So we just didn't get the results that we were striving for. And so we started measuring out the concentrated carbohydrates like the whole grains and starchy vegetables. And our numbers were so much better. And I've had a number of clients who have been following diets where they allow unlimited amounts of whatever, you know, whole plant foods you want. And they consistently do better when these things are restricted to some extent, so that we need to undershoot caloric requirements to produce weight loss. And once insulin sensitivity is restored, it's not as big of a deal if your body weight is where it needs to be. But I would say with whole grains, the thing that I am most concerned about is the degree of processing of those whole grains. So we all accept that refined grains are bad news for people with diabetes and for everyone. They increase our risk of disease. But whole grains, people see a label and see the word whole grain and think that's completely a great choice because it's got whole grains. But what we need to recognize is that the degree of processing matters even for whole grains. And so I created the whole grain hierarchy and to help people understand and to choose, make better choices where grains are concerned. And so at the top of the whole grain hierarchy are intact whole grains. And these are grains that have had nothing healthful removed, nothing harmful added. They are almost as they're picked off the plant with just the husk removed, that's it. So we're talking about barley and kamut, spelt or wheat berries, quinoa, wild rice, brown, red, or black rice, buckwheat, teff, sorghum, the intact grains. And it takes your body quite a while to break those down and to absorb them into the bloodstream. And when you look at the GI of these grains, it's consistently quite low, lower than a more processed whole grain. And then the next on the hierarchy would be cut whole grains. So like things like steel cut oats. And then would be the rolled whole grains like rolled oats. And then after rolled oats, we would have shredded grains like shredded wheat, and then ground grains like whole wheat flour, and then flaked grains and puffed grains at the bottom of the hierarchy. And as you go down the hierarchy, you are essentially increasing the surface area of the grain and the rate at which it will be absorbed into the bloodstream. So, and not only that, you're exposing the grain to heat, light, oxygen, pressure, thereby damaging some of the nutrients that are present. And when you go down fairly low on the hierarchy, like the ground grains, the flaked grains, the puffed grains, often you've got components added to the food that we know are potentially detrimental, like fat and salt and all sorts of food additives and sugars and artificial sweeteners and so on and so on. Nobody eats a bowl of flour, right? You add things to it to make a product before you eat it. And so for the ultimate results for people with diabetes, you would be staying at the very top of the hierarchy with just intact or maybe cut and a little bit of rolled whole grains, and you would be, limiting your portion sizes to some extent. That to me is ideal. As soon as you add in the flours and the puffed and the flaked and all of that, those types of grains, you'll struggle a little more with driving this disease into remission.
And we're just so unfamiliar, though, with how nature presents these grains. When we think, and that's why we see the label and it says whole grain, and we say, okay, I guess that's what I'm supposed to have, because if we had to make these things ourselves, we would get quite a workout.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I think, I don't know how many people have seen a wheat berry, or if they did see it, if they would be able to identify that
or be able to prepare it. So, sometimes you can sprout them, you can just cook them and have them. I mean, they are the base of my breakfast bowl every day. So I have intact grains and I love them. They're chewy and they just have so much texture and I just love them. But a lot of people don't even know what to do with them. So it's learning to use really, truly whole foods.
Yeah. And even just, there are people that probably don't even know where they would buy these things.
Yeah, and you can buy them, at any natural food store. You can even buy them on Amazon. You can buy them, in a lot of places. So there are a lot of companies that in Canada we have, Organic Matters, and there's different companies that sell organic whole foods, and you can get them for a really good price.
Yeah, so that's something that, and you talked about that you created this hierarchy. So how could people find that?
Well, it would be on my website, and I have it in a lot of my presentations as well. But it's also, of course, in all my books, like Kick Diabetes Essentials, the Kick Diabetes Cookbook. So, I think I've included the whole grain hierarchy in pretty much every book I've written.
Yeah, and I remember a while ago, I stumbled upon a video that you did that you actually showed.
Yes.
So that we could actually identify them and see what they were, and it was even helpful to me because I wasn't familiar with all of those grains. So I really enjoyed that, and
good.
I'll try to find a link to that and include that in the description and the show notes so that people can check that out, because we really need to get educated, guys.
And Amy, the reason I actually came up with that hierarchy is, and I've had several groups come to me and say, we're doing the whole food plant-based diet, but we're not getting the results we're looking for with our patients. We've been a little disappointed. What do you think we could do differently? And in almost every case, it's eating, there are a lot of things, but eating intact grains rather than these more processed whole grains makes all the difference in the world. There was a chip group right close to me, and they continued to get higher triglycerides, and the number of things weren't coming down the way they had hoped. When they switched to using intact grains or predominantly intact grains, they said there wasn't one single individual that didn't respond appropriately to the whole food plant-based diet. Their results were just so much better. So it really does make a difference.
Yeah, because I think that these grains are in the same kind of category as the fruits, where people are fearful of them because
Yes,
there's so
exactly.
much confusion
Yeah,
as to
yeah,
it's not necessarily what the food is, it's what the form that it comes in, the
that's
package.
right.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah. Well, let's see. Probably want to know, is it possible to reverse diabetes without medication? If so, what steps are most effective? And I'm glad that she asked that question, because we really should talk about medications here too, right? Because we don't want to just take this. If somebody has diabetes, we don't want them to just take it upon themselves to adopt this lifestyle and not work with their physician if they're on medications, right?
Yeah, so it is possible to reverse diabetes without medications, and we've seen, most of the evidence that we have for diabetes remission comes from one of three places. Number one is from people that have undergone bariatric surgery. And when you undergo bariatric surgery and lose a lot of weight, you also lose fat in your liver and pancreas. And when you lose fat in your liver and pancreas, it restores insulin sensitivity very quickly. And so we see remission after bariatric surgery often. So that's the first line of evidence. The second line of evidence is patients who've received dietary interventions or diet and lifestyle interventions. And some of these interventions have used very low calorie diets. So like, the direct trial, they used 825 to 850 calorie per day liquid diet for 12 weeks. And then, they put patients on a sort of a maintenance diet for the next, up to 12 months. And so these kinds of diets have been extraordinarily effective in driving diabetes into remission. But we also see it with plant-based diets. So there was, a study from ACLM, the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. It was a case series of 59 people treated with plant-based diets, and about 37% achieved remission in that trial. And then, we have a number of other studies with one with Joel Furman, where he had, drops of 2.4 percentage points in A1C and very high remission rates as well. So we've seen it with plant-based diets, and then the third line of evidence is from pharmacotherapy. So this is with medication, and primarily it's with the use of GLP-1 agonists that, of course, drive weight loss. They reduce glucagon secretion and slow the absorption of food into the bloodstream. And so they are very effective at driving weight loss, which of course can result in diabetes remission if weight loss is significant enough. And a lot of people, are very hesitant about GLP-1 agonists because there's always side effects to medications. And the thing is this is a very, very tricky business, because for some people who are 100 pounds overweight, or who have struggled with weight loss, trying to lose weight their whole lives, they just have tried everything and can't do it. The use of these medications often can result in a 50 to 100 pound weight loss for them, and can drive their diabetes into remission. And so you have to weigh the potential downsides of that medication with the potential benefits of the weight loss for not just diabetes, but for heart disease and everything else. And so there are some individuals for whom this is a reasonable choice, especially if they just have tried every diet and just can't seem to do it for whatever reason. And they've struggled from the time they were a child with being overweight. And so I don't want to say that we should never use these things. There's no place for them, because I think there is a place for them. And for some people, they can be lifesavers, even if there are potential adverse consequences to consuming them. It's always a risk-benefit analysis, so we need to keep an open mind about that.
Yeah, because typically if somebody has that type 2 diabetes, they most likely have that metabolic syndrome where they have the blood pressure and the cholesterol, heart disease, and so forth. So, yeah, it is a slippery slope. And like I said, I don't even think I had pre-diabetes, but I had, not measurable, but I had symptoms of that it was going to happen to me before I adopted this lifestyle. And the symptoms were not pleasant. And I can only imagine what it would be like for somebody that actually had diabetes. Because I mean, I've had clients who have diabetes, and they're working with a physician, and I'm helping them figure out how to adopt a lifestyle so that they can.
And ideally, ideally we want to do it with just diet and lifestyle and other pillars of lifestyle medicine. That's ideal.
Yeah.
But for people that are just, their bodies are resistant, if they use GLP-1 agonists or whatever medications, they still want to do that in conjunction with all of the healthy lifestyle changes. What the GLP-1 agonist does is make it easier for them to reduce their food consumption because it helps depress hunger. They feel more satiated on smaller portions of food. And so it's used as an adjunct to the healthy lifestyle changes, as opposed to thinking we can just do this and continue as we're doing. That, I think, is much less healthful and much less effective.
Right. Well, Nina wanted to know, what role does exercise play in managing diabetes? And she also wanted to know if you recommended a certain type of exercise. And I thought that was interesting because Boomer and Beyond Wellness, who has been on the show many times, she leads exercise classes here, and she wanted to know what your exercise routine is these days, so we can combine those questions.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's start with what activities are best, and is, does exercise play a role in helping with driving diabetes into remission? And I can tell you, in my work in the Marshall Islands, this was we had a randomized controlled trial, and we randomized people to either an intervention group or a control group. And in the intervention group, they received a whole food plant-based diet, but exercise was such a critical component as well. So we had people exercising an hour a day plus walking after every meal. And that was like magic. I can't tell you how important exercise is after meals. What it essentially does is it keeps blood glucose from rising too high. So exercise increases insulin sensitivity, and so the muscles are better able to use the available insulin to use up the blood sugar. But also, when muscles contract during physical activity, cells are actually able to take up glucose with or without insulin. So this is the one instance where you actually don't need insulin to use glucose for energy. And so for people who are not, their insulin isn't working properly, or they're not making enough, this is just, it is like magic. It helps them so much to control their blood sugars after meals. So we had people in the Marshall Islands after every meal. They didn't have to walk fast. They didn't have to walk for a long time, but at least 10 to 15 minutes. We usually did 15 to 20 after meals. And the difference it made in our results was really quite phenomenal. So yes, exercise is important. And it honestly, any type of exercise, whether it's, cardio is always really exceptionally beneficial, but resistance training is very important too. You want to keep your muscles strong. Flexibility is important. Balance exercises are important. And so, my exercise routine is, some people will say, well, that's ridiculous. That's a lot. But for me, I'm sitting at a desk all day. Exercise for me is important. So my exercise routine is, Mondays I do spin and core class. Tuesdays I do a step class followed by a yoga class. Wednesday I do kickboxing. Thursdays I do a HIIT class followed by yoga. Fridays I do a body power class, so it's all weights. Saturdays I do kickboxing or spin again. Sundays I do a really challenging HIIT and a yoga class. And I walk, I sometimes run. If I can't get to the gym on that day, I'll do a run or I'll do a class online. But exercise is a part of my daily life. I'm almost 66 years old. I can still do handstands and headstands and the splits and, that kind of stuff because I haven't stopped doing it. It for me is just so important to a healthy lifestyle.
Yes, and I have seen you do those wonderful feats, and you're so and you don't have to do a handstand and the splits, but you really do.
No,
right?
Exactly, and I keep some weights beside my desk. When somebody calls me, I'll do a few arm exercises. When I'm sitting for a long time, every hour or so, I will get up and do a few weights or a few stretches, or just to keep active all day. And I love physical activity. I just think it feels so good, and it feels good when your body is strong, and it sends a message to others as well, because so many people think of those that are eating plant-based as being kind of skinny weaklings, and when they see a person that has pretty good muscles and is really strong, especially for someone at this stage of life, it impresses them. They say, wow, if you can do that eating the way you do, then maybe there's something to this.
Yeah, we had recently had a party, and some neighbors came, because usually when I have food, I have my plant-based friends. So we did, the plant-based friends came for a potluck dinner, and then afterwards I invited neighbors to come over for a gathering. And so one of them asked me about my diet, and of course that protein question came up.
Yes, of course.
And we all have our stock answers as what we should say. And I was wearing a sleeveless dress, so I just said, "Do I look like I need protein?"
Good for you.
So she was shocked, and so and when you just said that about how we have to broadcast that to people, that we're not frail beings, and even at our age we can be strong. So I was hoping that might have helped. And Boomer Beyond Wellness said, plus it's fun. It's great to act out like
it is fun.
Yes. I think that the older that you get, you really appreciate it more, because you know that you're supposed to be declining. But if you do work at it, you can definitely work at getting your muscles, and there's always a way to start, and it doesn't. And like you said, you could have a 1 pound hand weight next to you. It doesn't have to be anything heavy.
No.
That, and then eventually, you can work your way up. And I did want to thank Boomer Beyond Wellness. She gave us a super sticker, and that's so helpful to keep the channel going. So I do appreciate that so much. Okay, so we had another question. Let's see. Oh, so Lily said, what do you recommend for someone who has trouble giving up processed snacks? Any healthy swaps?
Oh, that's a great question. Yes, I generally, for people, especially for people with type 2 diabetes, I encourage them to eat just 3 meals a day and not have snacks at all, because they're extra calories that they don't need when they're trying to lose weight. And weight loss, just to interject this a little bit, is critical to diabetes remission, because it's the excess fat accumulation in the liver and pancreas that drives insulin resistance and beta cell dysfunction. And so, this is literally lipotoxicity, which means you're storing fat in places it shouldn't be stored, like your liver. And weight loss diminishes these fat stores, and just it really is critical to reversing it. And I mentioned the direct trial a little bit ago, but this trial, they found that people that, this is, really quite extraordinary, people that lost at least 33 pounds or 15 kilograms, 86% of them went into remission. People that lost 22 to 33 pounds or 10 to 15 kilos, 57% of them went into remission. If they lost 11 to 22 pounds, 5 to 10 kilograms, 34% went into remission. And those that lost just up to 11 pounds or 5 kilos, only 7% went into remission. So remission rates are directly associated with the amount of weight you lose. And so, the question of snacks, there are some people that really do better having more small meals. And so including some snacks, and some people, especially if you're quite thin and you're, a whole food plant-based eater, and you're trying to maintain or gain weight, then definitely you want some healthy snacks. And there are a lot of ultra processed foods, and I want to take this moment to just mention these UPF foods that you're talking about. So we're looking. So what? Just to give you an idea of what these things actually are, UPF foods, or ultra processed foods, are nutrient poor, energy dense, industrially processed foods that are made from cheap, highly refined carbohydrates like white flour, white rice, white sugar, cheap fats like hydrogenated oils, palm oil, shortening, lard, and sometimes even refined proteins like whey from milk or soy protein isolate. And to make UPF, or ultra processed foods, look and taste like real food, and to enhance their shelf life, we add dyes and other colors, flavors, artificial sweeteners, stabilizers, bulking agents, defoaming agents, anti-caking agents, emulsifiers, glazing agents, preservatives, all of these things. And so we're talking about potato chips, cheesy, sugar-sweetened beverages, pre-sweetened cereals, ice cream, chicken or fish nuggets, ready-to-eat frozen entrees, packaged fried noodles, most candies. These are all ultra-processed foods. And we know that they are directly associated with, there was actually a 2024 study showing that they were directly associated with mortality and 32 harmful effects. Then there was another study looking specifically at diabetes, and they found, diabetes risk was hugely impacted from the intake of ultra processed foods. And the thing to know is an estimated 60% of calories in the American diet come from UPF foods, or UPF, with 80% being sort of at the upper end. And so these are things that they result in bad health outcomes because they have very poor nutrient profiles. They have high energy density. They have so much horrible stuff added. They're low in fiber. They have an intensive industrial processing. There are materials in the packages that can migrate into the foods, like microplastics, bisphenols, phthalates, all of that stuff. And so these are foods we definitely want to replace with healthy alternatives. And so getting back to that question, so what do you have instead? Fresh fruit and nuts. Kale chips that you make in your dehydrator. I love to make healthy muffins and cookies and bars, and you can do those with whole foods, and nobody would ever know they're done with whole foods. So I just am writing a new book for seniors, and I just created 2 cookie recipes, and they both have some nut butter. And one uses dates as the sugar, one uses blackstrap molasses, but they're, basically you can do almost any muffin or cookie without necessarily added sugars, just using dried fruits, or added concentrated fats and oils, just using a nut or seed butter. You can even use things like applesauce and mashed bananas and so on. So certainly those are really good options, but you can also use protein-rich snacks like edamame, roasted soybeans, these hummus with veggies. These can be really healthy snacks as well. And everybody loves popcorn, but if you have popcorn once in a while, just be really conscious of what you're putting on top. You don't want to be adding oils and such. Just a little bit of seasoning is a reasonable option. So all of these things can work, but generally you want to be picking the most nutrient-dense choices.
Well, that's great. It kind of segued into this question, and I don't know if you wanted to add anything. Because Tom wanted to know if there is a safe amount of natural sweeteners like maple syrup or dates for people with diabetes.
Yeah, and this is such a good question too. And, some people use things like monk fruit and stevia, which are what we call high intensity sweeteners, which means they have a lot of sweetness for a very small amount of food. And so these are things that won't raise blood sugars. And so the only issue with monk fruit is sometimes it's diluted with erythritol, which has been associated with some adverse heart outcomes. And so, I would be a little bit cautious. I would try to choose a monk fruit that doesn't contain erythritol, which is a sugar alcohol. But otherwise, natural sweeteners like blackstrap molasses, maple syrup, sugar is sugar, and they will increase blood glucose levels. So you're wanting to minimize intake. Optimal intake of added sugars for people with diabetes is as close to zero as you can get. Now, dried fruits, I think, are another story because of the fiber and the nutrients and antioxidants and so on that they contain. So I think they are very fair game, but they're very concentrated in calories and sugar as well. So they can impact your blood sugar significantly, and they can interfere with achieving your weight loss goals if you're eating enough of them. So to me, a desirable thing, like one of my favorite sort of after meal treats is a medjool date that's stuffed. I make a little sort of I guess you could call it a fudge frosting that's just dates, nut butter, and a bit of cocoa powder. And then a few nuts on top, like maybe 3 hazelnuts or something. And that's a really satisfying after meal treat, but it's one date. It's not more than one. And if you make cookies with dates, you have one cookie. You don't, and that's the thing. You want to be having a small portion of these kinds of foods.
Yeah, we like to, at our house, we like to make oatmeal cookies. And after they're cooled off, I portion them out in separate containers so that this way you're not tempted to just open the whole thing.
And what I do is I freeze them instantly. Yeah. Once they're made, they go in the freezer. And then if we want one, we take one out of the freezer and it thaws out very quickly, but it doesn't even matter. It's delicious right from the freezer. Oh, yeah. So maybe I shouldn't say that too loudly, but anyway, and I make special treats at Christmas time. Like I make caramel out of dates and a nut butter, like cashew butter. And then you got this caramel, and then you can put a couple of pecans on a silicone mat on a cookie tray, and your little blob of caramel on top. And then, you brush very dark, like I'll use 80% or something, dark organic chocolate. And it's like a turtle that's a healthy turtle. And so you still want to have fun. You want to still have treats at special occasions. So this is not something you can't ever do. But again, you have one and it's a special treat.
Yeah, absolutely. But lately, we have found that sweet potatoes, baked sweet potatoes, maybe it's because I've been eating this way for over a decade, but when we add those things as sweeteners,
Yes.
My husband loves to cook, and he's actually going to be coming on next week to do recipe demos for us. But he made something, and I said, "Did you put date syrup in this?" It was some kind of a bean soup or something, and he said, "No, I added some baked sweet potato."
Yeah, wonderful idea. They work beautifully in brownies and all sorts of things. You can put sweet potatoes as a sweetener. It's just a great idea.
Yeah, and some of them, to me, they taste like cake. I think like the Japanese or I don't know. There's one potato that when I eat it, I feel like I should be eating it as a dessert instead of a part of the meal. Yeah, it definitely tastes like cake. Yeah. Well, you've been giving us some really interesting facts and great tips, and I think that all of these things are so helpful. I could just talk to you forever about
Well,
this.
and I just have to say as well, because carbohydrates are so often viewed as kind of the dietary villains, especially for people with diabetes. And so a lot of people think, well, all I have to do is remove carbohydrates. But the truth about carbohydrates is the health outcomes you experience from carbohydrates depend on the quality of the carbohydrates. And you talked about slow versus fast carbohydrates. And I often talk about high quality versus low quality or poor quality carbohydrates. Very similar idea. But we know that poor quality carbohydrates increase diabetes risk, high quality carbohydrates decrease type 2 diabetes risk. And so, high quality carbohydrates are very consistently associated with increased longevity and reduced risk of all chronic diseases. So those are the carbohydrates that are intrinsic to whole plant foods: vegetables, fruits, legumes, whole grains, nuts, seeds, all of that. And of course, as we talked about, they're the ones loaded with fiber and prebiotics and antioxidants and phytochemicals and so on. On the other hand, low quality carbohydrates, which unfortunately probably make up 90% of the carbohydrates consumed in North America. And that's why people have this negative view about carbohydrates, because most of the carbohydrates they eat are unhealthy. But they're basically carbohydrates that have been stripped of their protective components by food processing techniques before they're consumed. And so we're talking about refined sugars and that you find in sodas and candies and so on, and refined starches like white flour and white rice and so on. And so not only are the products stripped of their protective components, but they have a bunch of junk added before you eat them. And so the deal with carbohydrates is carbohydrates need to come predominantly from whole plant foods.
Yeah, and that's the simple answer, right? If you can
Yes.
pick it off of the tree or pull it out from under the ground or clip it off of a plant or pick it off of a bush, that's what we're talking about, right? Those are the
Absolutely.
worry about. They were put on this planet for a reason, and we shouldn't be fearful of them. And if we can't do that, then those are the ones that we probably should be avoiding. Absolutely. Well, very, very well. That's something so important to say. And you have so much more information about diabetes, and we could go on and on because you've done. You had a wonderful study in Marshall Islands, and you made some great discoveries there, and you were able to go back there and revisit it recently, and,
Yes.
and just really learn a lot. We have one more question though. C's want to know: does a very high raw vegetable diet help even more with prevention or remission of diabetes?
I would have to say yes. Generally, high raw diets are eliminating processed, especially highly processed foods. They're gone on a raw diet. And raw diets tend to be even more concentrated in the protective dietary components. It takes longer to digest and absorb the sugars from raw foods. And so we often get really quite dramatic responses with our raw food diet. Now, that having been said, there are a little bit, I would say, higher nutrition risks when it comes to nutrients with high raw diets. So vitamin B12, vitamin D, essential fatty acids could be an issue. Iodine, if you're not using seaweed, protein, iron, zinc, even calcium. So you really have to be putting together a diet that is nutritionally adequate and supplying some supplements, and especially B12 and vitamin D for most people. And so there's that, balancing act. But in terms of therapeutic value for getting your blood glucose and blood lipids and so forth in order, very, very powerful results with high raw diets.
That's good to know. Well, Green Warrior, please click like to show your appreciation for what Brenda shared with us today. That's how we know we get feedback from you in that way. And that's how we applaud. And Brenda, please tell us about what you do and how we can find you.
Yeah, so I mean, a lot of what I do is writing books, writing articles, and doing lectures. And so I'm, very, very excited about speaking at medical conferences, lifestyle medicine conferences, and conferences for the public. I do, I'm always doing, articles for the general public as well. I post a lot on my webpage, and people can get a hold of me by going to brendadavisrd.com. They can email me at brendadavis@telus.net, TELUS, and always happy to try to help people.
Yes, and I feel like that is your mission, is to help people. And
yes,
really,
exactly. And I've been doing this. I've been on this path for about 37 years. So it's been a long time, and I'm just amazed by how far we've come in that time as a sort of medical community as well as the general public. So it's very, very exciting time.
Oh, sure. And a lot of it is from your contributions. So
thank you. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Brenda, for sharing your invaluable expertise and helping us to better understand how to manage and get diabetes under control through a whole food, plant-based diet and get it in remission.
Well, thank you, Amy, as well, for all you're doing to promote this way of life and to educate others as well. I really appreciate that too.
So, Brenda, tell us what your final take-home message is for our Green Warriors.
Well, I guess if I had to say one thing as a take-home message, I would say that, it's not all or nothing. You don't have to be perfect. Every step you take in the right direction is worth taking. And that when, every step you take, it provides benefits beyond yourself. So it's beyond our own health benefits that we would experience for ourselves and our families in terms of, reducing pain, suffering, and death in animals, in terms of reducing our carbon footprint and preserving this planet for future generations. So there are so many wins when you do this, and just take whatever baby steps you can take, and eventually you'll get there.
Very nice. Thank you. Green Warrior, tell us what you're going to remember from today's conversation. Type it in the comments so that other people can take a peek at learn what we were talking about today. And I always like to hear, because the Green Warriors always come up with some really great takeaways to share with us. I also wanted to thank Just Task Voice, because she did the promos and she did countdowns and she made all the media and the thumbnails, and she does a lot of behind the scenes work that really helps promote the broadcast and get the word out to everyone. And Just Task Voice, tell us what special guest is coming up next.
Do you want to wow your guests with plant-based SOS-free dishes this Thanksgiving? Join us as Amy's hubby Rick returns for a festive recipe demo, showcasing delicious and healthy holiday options. Join us Wednesday, November 20th, 3 p.m. Eastern, noon Pacific, on Be Green with Amy Live.
Awesome.
Oh, yeah, he's fantastic. I'm very lucky.
Oh.
I also wanted to thank you, Green Warrior, for joining us today. Your engagement and support make these discussions meaningful and impactful. And I hope you're feeling inspired to take a closer look at your food choices and make some positive changes to your health and well-being. Remember, every bite we take, it's an opportunity to nourish our bodies and, like Brenda, become the healthiest versions of ourselves. So please stay tuned for more empowering content. Please subscribe to my channel and check out Brenda's social media and her website and all her wonderful books. And I'll have links to all those in the show notes. And please share my message with others as well who can benefit, because together as Green Warriors, we can make a meaningful difference in the world. And as a special thank you to all of you, I'm offering you 5 free recipes. So you can go to my website, begreenwithamy.com/join, and I will send you some delicious recipes that have been developed by my hubby, Rick. And they're all SOS free, healthful, and so delicious. These are things that we enjoy throughout our weeks and months. And I wanted to also invite you now to take your right hand and grab your left shoulder, and take your left hand and grab your right shoulder and squeeze. Because that's a hug from me to you. That's a hug from me to you, Brenda, for being so
thank you.
with your time, and because such an honor to have you here today. And Green Warrior, if you want to type in the comments my tagline as Brenda and I stay together. Are you ready, Brenda?
You bet.
Okay. So until I see all of you again, remember, be strong,
Be strong,
be well,
and be green.
Brenda,
thank you.
it's so nice to see all of you again. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Looking for really tasty recipes that are SOS free? No sugar, oil, or salt. How can it taste good? Well, if you like flavor, then you'll love this Be Green with Amy recipe ebook. Get your copy today. Click on the link in the show notes. Be strong, be well, and be green.